Fellas, so this past weekend, we had conferences 3 and 4 of the summer going under our belt as Ross, you headed up to Richmond, Virginia from Florida for the Central Virginia Sports Performance Summit, otherwise known as CVASPS. Always run incredibly well by Jay DeMeo. Just always a top-notch conference, not only with the speaker lineups, but the way that Jay sets things up to make you interact with other coaches, even some of the speakers. And then that social aspect that you get at CVASPS is kind of unmatched. And then I headed up from Virginia to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I was up there for the first and hopefully continued or kind of annual Revolutions in Speed Training Clinic hosted by Cal Dietz and Chris Corfus and Dan Fichter. And so, yeah, Ross, we want to hear about CVASPS, and if we have any sort of time at the end, we could talk a little bit about some of the things that I learned up in Minnesota, but we'll probably have to save that for another episode here. But right off the bat, Ross, kind of just recap for us your first experience of going to CVASPS in 2019 and ultimately why you wanted to go back here in 2022. We had kind of 2 COVID years, and then, we could kind of just start getting into it and chop it up.
Yeah, so when we went to CVAPS in 2019, I definitely thought that was probably the best conference we'd ever been to in terms of details and the speakers and really the nitty-gritty of it. TFC is always good as well, but there's something with, I think just with CVAPS and what Jay does is he's going to get some speakers that have a lot of depth of knowledge on whatever subject, and they do a great job of breaking it down and building on each other. And it's not always the same subject either. It's not like you're hearing, 5 speakers of the same topic. It's pretty diverse. So, because I remember leaving CVAPS in 2019, and me and you, I know we both had a stupid amount of notes. And it was, and again, you're hearing coaches too, at least for me at the time, like I didn't even know who they were. And then as soon as they're talking, it's like, why don't I know who this person is? And you kind of go down those rabbit holes. And so then obviously I had the opportunity to come back up for this year. Same thing, man. It was still good. Coaches, again, were knowledgeable, good presentation. It's still, in terms of just information, I think it's probably the best one of the best ones, if not the best one you can get to, because it's also, because it's limited on the number of people that can be there in person. It's not like you're there at thousands of people or 1,000 people at a conference. Instead, you got 100 people or 150 people, whatever it is, in a room listening to these people, and it's pretty informal and talking to these guys. But it was this year. The speakers were Adam Petway, if I'm saying his last name right, Al Vermeil, Dak Deschamps, Mike Wadango, Jonas, and then Ali Kirshner. I mean, they were studs. And the first speaker was Adam, and I had never heard of him before, but he is currently the basketball guy for Louisville. And before he was in the NBA, I think he spent some time with the 76ers and maybe Golden State, but I could be wrong there. But I know he's in the NBA, and he was at Arkansas at one point doing track and basketball. But he broke down, he's got a ton of research on the biomechanics of basketball and broke down the different joint angles and actions and plays and movements of the NBA. So it was super detailed. It wasn't necessarily something that can help me, but it was pretty cool just hearing that research and that he'd taken the time to do that. And he's written a book. I think it's literally called Biomechanics of Basketball. Don't quote me on that.
Oh, wow.
But it was good. The takeaways he had a couple of just little nuggets that I liked, because he was talking about the day before a game, wanting your reactive strength index, your RSI, to, if it is a little, if it's above average, then the day before a game, then they had found that your game speed is above average. But if it's below average the day before game, then your game speed is below average, which makes sense. But it was just a little nugget that was like, okay, that's something that if I ever have the technology to measure that, that you can kind of track that and keep that in mind. And that was post practice RSI, And then he was talking about with like research, how do we make and design research that better reflects our game, not our game, but sport. Because if in a closed setting in lifting or in a science lab, he was making the point that athletes are going to produce like 3 times the body weight forces, but in a game, when you're not in a research lab, they're going to get upwards of 10 times body weight forces. So how do you better design research and drills, not drills, but research and things to track that are more closely mimicking the forces produced in a game? So then it's a little more accurate, I thought that was a good point. He compared it to caged and uncaged animals. So that again, in the big thing there, because he led with that. And then again, he's talking about his research of this is really what we need to be looking at, and not, the force plate data and stuff is great, but the real test is in the game. Then is the last
touch on that. Oh yeah, no. Finish up here with Adam, and then I have some questions. I want to know more about the caged versus uncaged.
Okay. So then the last kind of big thing from him that I got was, caged, uncaged, but then his other big highlight was that elite athletes are the fastest at the least amount of distance. So in other words, they are very economically sound when it comes to their movement. They're not going to waste movement. They're going to be very efficient. And when it comes to making a decision to make a play, they're going to take the least amount of energy, and they're also going to be the fastest at that quick distance. Because then they were showing like yardage of in an NBA game versus college versus high school. And that high school players, you're all over the court and you're running everywhere. But NBA players had the least amount of distance in a game, and it's just because they're efficient and they don't waste movement.
Oh wow, that's pretty cool. Wow,
that down. That's good stuff.
Yeah.
Ross, one question. While I got a sec here, talking about the RSI, going like the pre-game day to game day. Did they find any way to affect a change before a game if they had a low?
Great question.
RSI.
Yeah, that is a great question. He didn't talk about that. He was just saying that they would, as far as like measuring it, they would run their practice the day before game. They would check the RSI, and then it was just comparatively, they would compare that data to then their, obviously their game day speed off the GPS. Now, I'm sure that if they saw that RSI was down the day before, they may or may not try to do some things, maybe pregame or 8 hours before in that morning to kind of get them better and get them fired up. But he did not specifically mention that stuff. But I think that's a really good point, though, and something to think about. Where if you do have that stuff lacking, like what is going to be the quickest and easiest way to attempt to bring that up, other than sleep, water, and get some food.
Yeah. You got to think like if that, their RSI is low from the baseline, they have from previous data, then you got to think they've got some way to, something's off. Mm-hmm. We see people come into a weight room and maybe, we do jumps or we do a grip test or whatever to get an idea of where they're at. And, whatever we do, something's off. Like they're stressed, something's happened in school, their girlfriend dumped them, so then what can we do to help? So I'm sure with their better analysis, they have some way of making some modifications for the athlete, hopefully.
Yeah, and I have the same question. If you went into like their recovery details or methods, if somebody did have a low RSI, but that's probably just one of the secrets of the trade that they're not willing to share just yet.
Yeah,
That was good. So along with, go ahead.
He was making the point. Well, really, he was pumping out so much data. I was like, I just kind of had to sit there and just watch because there was no like random notes. It was just figure after figure after figure. I'm like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and watch, and we'll see if we pick up something.
Yeah. So when he was going over all the biomechanical stuff, did that trigger you for, oh, let me try to think of this for this sport or that for that sport? Or was it just like, oh, this is a lot and too detailed. I cover all these sports. I can't get into the nitty gritty on just one.
Yeah, I think if I was working with one sport, it's really just more, I think it's really just more good information to know, because he was saying they used video analysis and like it took a stupid amount of work to kind of draw and measure these angles. Like he broke down like offense, defense, and then it was, the angle is, the knee is at this angle, the ankle is at this angle, typically at this step. So it kind of boiled down to thinking, at least the way I thought about it is they need to have this minimum amount of ankle flexion, this minimum amount of knee flexion, hip flexion, like being able to get into these positions at least to be healthy and things like that. Like that was the big thing that I thought about. Nothing, at least with like my high school kids, I'm not going to think about that, but a couple coaches, like here, I think he had made a comment of like basically that American football should be doing this type of breakdown with American football that he is doing with basketball, because it's taking the sport and making it, you're actually like looking and evaluating and testing what's actually happening on the field versus randomly jumping on a force plate and trying to evaluate it that way.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense, and that's a little bit of what I came away with from, if you remember, the coaches site conference where these hockey coaches were breaking down all these on ice scenarios, and I was just trying to think, okay, how can I take what they're talking about there and build upon it in the weight room? And so a note I wrote down from there was, you were just saying how like elite athletes are the most efficient, they take the least energy at quick distances. That's something we could affect in the weight room, making sure they have mobile enough ankles, strong enough feet, strong enough knees and hips. And that's going to help, project them in that quick, all right, jab, get here, get into space. But also just a reminder of, you need to have a high IQ for the sport to make it to a high and elite level. We've all played with a great athlete who just didn't know the sport, and it just limited them. So kind of a plug for coaches, really break down film and teach your athletes how to play the game and what to see, and all those factors really go a long way. To have NBA players travel less distance than a high school player, like that's crazy.
It's funny. I think of when I was playing junior hockey, there was a guy, a vet on one of the other teams who every year was one of the top point guys, but he was fat. Like, he was fat. I mean, like, 19, 20 years old, and everybody in the league chirped him, but here he was, one of the like top 3 point guys in the league, and he just saw the ice, and he was literally like everywhere, but then nowhere.
Yep.
And, making plays, puck off his stick quick, in open ice, and, he was putting pucks in the net. Just very efficient. Maybe that's why he was fat. But
Yeah, not as much movement.
Yeah.
I always tell the story of one of the not greatest athletes I ever coached was one of our top 4D, just because his IQ on the ice was so high. And we were measuring heart rates during games, and he would always have one of the lowest like trimp scores or strain scores or how hard that was for you type of thing. Even though he played big minutes, it was just he was always calm, cool, collected in stressful situations and did not waste energy. He knew exactly what angle to take, what read to make. Again, because he wasn't a freak athlete, he wasn't able to kind of like jump into the rush a lot. And so he was just kind of a solid stay-at-home top 4 defenseman for us. But yeah, no, it's always interesting. The higher the level, the higher the IQ. I just think it goes a long way.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, so then
something. Oh, yeah. So one more on that. Something super interesting was Chris Corfist and Cal Dietz were talking about surfaces that they have their guys sprint on. And so Cal is having them sprint on a concrete like mezzanine at the hockey arena, right? So his weight room is directly below the mezzanine of the arena. They go up a flight of stairs and they're sprinting on that concrete. And Chris has his people that come to his house sprint on his street. And Chris cited basketball players as incredibly elastic, springy, and resilient. Right? When you think of how many games are in an NBA season and they're traveling at very, very high speeds, for the most part, like basketball players are decently healthy to make it almost a whole year. Yeah, you're going to have injuries, but it's kind of crazy when you think about it. High speeds, high velocities, 2, 3, 4 nights a week. And Chris was just kind of citing like they all grow up playing on concrete or playing on blacktops, and they're all kind of fine. So I just thought that was an interesting takeaway from the basketball world that a sprint coach made.
I mean, I sprint my kids on a gym floor every day, so we're doing just fine.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So then,
there we go.
Al Vermeil.
All right, so
Al Vermeil spoke after
next
that.
speaker up, and this was on Friday for you, Ross, was Al Vermeil.
Yeah, so he spoke after that, and then it's always good to have guys like that speak because it always brings me back to center of somebody that's done it for a long time, and he's gonna have all the knowledge that obviously that we have, but point being, he did it without technology, so you're naturally having to kind of really notice things and really watch your athletes at the end of the day to see what you're doing and be really detailed in that perspective. And what I did not realize about Coach Vermeil is that he coached and taught at a high school for like 10 years when he first got started.
Oh, wow.
He was a football coach and then did the strength stuff for his team. And I could be wrong, and do not quote me on this, but I could have sworn that he said he went straight from the high school he was at to the 49ers as their strength guy. Now that was through like family connections because his brother's a football coach. So, that was through some connections there as far as making that transition. But either way, he went from a high school to the 49ers and obviously the Bulls as well. The big things from him, and this was just kind of some other coaches had made this point of everything starts and ends with work capacity and strength. And me and Chris were talking about this a little bit of, at least for high school kids, I can 100% say that, yeah, they 100% need the work capacity and that strength work first in conjunction with sprinting and jumping and all that kind of stuff. But they do severely lack the work capacity and the strength, most of them. And then when you get to college, yes, you still have kids that do need to work on work capacity and strength, but there's a lot of kids that do already have that base and do already have that strength. So it's not necessarily a huge emphasis compared to what it may need to be for a younger athlete, at least what I'm seeing. And so it's just it was good to hear that, because that's a big debate that I've kind of had in my head of I do need to touch on this a little bit more than what I do. And it was just good to hear it from him and a couple other coaches. And then his other big point was athleticism is all about impulse, being able to contract and relax quickly. And he got into talking about cleans and things of that nature. But at the end of the day, it comes back to your ability as an athlete to contract quickly and relax quickly. And cleans accomplish that, jumps, sprints, that type of stuff. And that just the way that he was really emphasizing it and the different movements that he also was suggesting also aligned with what Coach Gillespie did in the workouts and the different things that he would do with plyos and different things. Because he also got into like single leg work, into some single leg jumps, like a step up jump, like having your foot up on the box, jumping up, landing back down on one foot, on the same foot. Broke that down, and then he got to talking about a little bit on high-low model. And after this past weekend, and I'm already sold on high-low model anyway, and that's just the best way to train an athlete, in my opinion. But he was just like, yeah, you have to go high-low, like you have to. And the caveat to that was he was making the point of that at the beginning of a season, and when you first start training, everything you do is going to be medium intensity because they're all out of shape. And so starting with work capacity and getting that in first, even if you were trying to do a high-low model, you're still going to be in the middle because they're just not in shape. So you might as well take time and deliberately plan work capacity type of work at the beginning, whether it's 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever you would like to do. That is, you might as well just start there, and then you can go high-low and do it that way. And of course, every strength and conditioning coach is probably going to agree that high-low is the way to go, but it was just good hearing it from him of it used to not do that, and then just found that was the way to go. And then the last point I'll make, and then you guys can we can break down some stuff, is he then made the point of you need to spend time with individual sport coaches. So you need to spend time with Olympic weightlifting, with track, with swim, with golf, whatever it may be, because those coaches are responsible for one person. They have to be very detailed. They have to find success for this person and learn these little nuances in order to fix them, versus these general things that we typically deal with. Individual sport coaches they've got to figure out a solution for the one person, which means you've got to have a really broad knowledge and a depth of knowledge in order to fix those things. So I thought that was a really great point.
It's to your point, it's amazing how these older coaches were able to do all this without a jump mat, without good VBT training, without all of the technology that we have today. It kind of always blows my mind, but knowing some of these older coaches, it is interesting. A lot of them end up kind of down the same path or the same road. And I'm always pumped to hear somebody that promotes the high-low model, because I agree with you, Ross, on that one. It just works. It just works so well. And so question for you now, Ross, is, and you kind of alluded to it, with this kind of reinforcement of the need for work capacity, and with you being at the high school level, and as your summer programs are kind of coming to an end because school starts soon down there in Florida, recap for us, or talk about next summer, maybe what you'll do different from a work capacity standpoint. Maybe what you did this summer or what you hope to do next summer.
Yeah, so I think next summer, the biggest... So I'll go back. This summer, I thought we did really well prepping I can speak to football, did really well prepping our kids for a bunch of high effort yards, sprints. And we got around 800 yards a week of legit full out sprints in some capacity. And that was,
wow.
And that's if you're including, your wickets that are, varying between 20 to 40 yards, plus your sprint, plus all, your Excel, all that kind of stuff. So roughly 800 yards a week. Plus we did 7-on-7. So they're playing the games. They're getting speed work there. Then that also does not include change of direction or agility work, which is more high speed yardage. And so, well, not high speed, but nevertheless, more yardage. So I think we did a good job of getting them ready for preseason and getting to that point. And I think they're ready to go for the ones that were consistent. I think for next summer, when it comes to building that work capacity, is doing a little better job of ramping them up to that point. Like we probably started around 600 yards and then went to 800, like not gradually, but we started maybe at 6, and then literally next week we're basically doing 800 every week, give or take. Do a little better job of ramping it up, and honestly trying to get a little more yardage, because there was a post on the National High School Strength and Conditioning Association's Facebook page talking about football conditioning and the yardage. And one of the guys from the high school that is Corpus is at, that their new strength guy, he posted their sprint yardage but just how many high speed yardages you get in a game. And the top end was basically 12 to 1400 yards for skill guys, and then linemen was like 800. And so getting those guys, at least within my training, getting them pretty close to that mark by the end of summer, but just starting at 600 and then ramp it up a little bit and get to that 1,000, 1,100, 1,200-ish mark. I'll be more, and I'll have a better answer for that once we get to the actual season. But to see how they're doing. But to answer your question, really, that work capacity, I think for in the summer, I'm not worried about it, because I think my work capacity work should be in January for football. Now for everybody else, it's just kind of going to be there from their sport per se, because their sport's going to get them in shape. But football is that anomaly where they do need that work capacity. But really in the beginning of these off seasons with these different sports, if they are legit in off season, that's where I'll start kind of getting that work capacity up. Like our baseball guys that are just baseball kids in the fall, I'll get that work capacity up here the next couple months.
Okay. No, that makes sense. It's good to hear how you kind of break down with the individual sports as well. And then to give a shameless plug for myself here when it comes to work capacity, I do a lunge matrix twice a week. And I think for hockey, but for all sports, it's incredible. And so our first week we start at, it's 42 lunges, because it's 7 different lunges, and we start with 3 reps each leg. So 21 and 21, 42. And we start the summer with 1 set of 3 each leg, and then to this week we hit 2 sets of 6 each leg. So we ramp up across beginning of May till this is our near last week of July, where we start with 42 lunges twice a week, and now we're up to 168 lunges twice a week. And to be able to do 168 lunges in 5 minutes-ish, and then go into a workout, or to wake up the next day and not be super sore, that's pretty wild. And I think it conditions the hips and the groin and everything really well, because we're going through, all the planes of motion and all that, hitting different angles that people will hit on the ice. So yeah, just a shameless plug for the lunge matrix, starting at 42, bringing them up to 168 total lunges.
Chris,
Yeah,
do
I'm
you
interested
find
what
that
you
your
guys
guys or
think.
girls are better at that?
That's a great question. I don't notice a difference.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the athlete, right? Some of them try to rush through it and they sort of short change their range of motion, and I got to get on them. And then others just kind of buy in and just rock and roll through it. But I haven't noticed a difference between men and women at my level, at least.
Nice. Question for you guys. Talking about work capacity still. I'm interested what you guys think in regards to multi-sport athletes and how we can fit that in, that work capacity time.
Great question.
Especially when it's almost like a continuous season going from sport to sport. Now, if you're playing your sport, then you'd think, maybe I already have that work capacity, but if it's going from like baseball to
wrestling,
yeah, I mean, like something that's much more demanding.
Take that away here, Ross.
How'd I know you were going to say that? So I think for it just depends on the sport. So I was talking about this today with Ben, our new guy. I have an athlete that plays football, basketball, and baseball, and when watching his jumps go from football transitioning into basketball, which is polar opposite, they dip a good bit. Then they go from basketball to baseball. They're running and jumping the best times they have during baseball season, which makes sense as it's the least stressful, more explosive. We're not in that, in that middle ground of basketball. So we're coming off the back end feeling really good. Now you could argue that basketball built his work capacity to then handle more work, to then recover better, to then, run at higher speeds, blah, blah, blah. But I think for the multi-sport athlete, it's solely going to depend on what their sports are. But I do think you need to hit that at least, 1 month out of the year in their off season or something, whether it's in a warm up, whether it's barbell complexes or whatever. And particularly, the anaerobic capacity piece, because they're going to get the aerobic piece, but not necessarily that anaerobic capacity, where complexes come into play. And I just thought of that because that was kind of Vermeil's thing. And Chris may have a different opinion than that. And Blair, you might too.
I don't have any experience with multi-sport athletes, just from always working at the college level. But yeah, it depends, right? That's always kind of the question and the answer there. It depends on what sport they're coming from and going into. But at least for me, when it comes to the high school level, I always felt that the first month of practices were always the sport coach building work capacity, whether they were doing that in a good way or a bad way. It always seemed like there was a lot of running, a lot of conditioning focus or emphasis. So I would just have to have a talk with the sport coach, whether it's like a club team or whether it's the high school that I would be working at, and kind of just get their opinions of what they're doing, and maybe whether we're going to consolidate the stressors and both do aerobic work, or I'm going to fill them and top them up on things they're not getting at practice. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not too sure.
All right.
An interesting thing on this work capacity topic, though, I think Cal Dietz does a good job of saying, like, hey, I run a GPP block and I run a very high volume program. And I thought it was really interesting. Cal had a couple slides, a couple presentations on conditioning, how to use a sled for conditioning, how to use a bike for conditioning, and how to just kind of run if those were your options. And at the end of his presentation, Chris Corfist, again a sprinting coach, just said, "Yeah, I'm going to steal some of those. I need more aerobic work or more work capacity work with my athletes, because the better aerobic base or capacity that you have, the more quality sets you could do and the more you could recover from." And so, yeah, it just is what it is. I think it always kind of comes full circle, or every coach may take a different route, but we all sort of end up at the same destination of there's just certain things you need. You need to be strong. You need to have work capacity.
Yeah, I've always liked Cal's GPP circuits, the 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, and then, continuing to push those for a couple weeks. It's one of those hard sells sometimes for the athletes, but man, it works. And then,
oh yeah,
I remember doing
that contralateral circuit that we've done before, Blair. Like that gasses you.
But you feel good. And also remember doing those super long ISOs too, and mixing those in.
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't included those too often anymore, but man, they were effective.
Yeah, that's funny. We were doing the 5-minute extreme ISOs before we knew of like DB Hammer or Jay Schroeder or really Dan Fichter. It was just like, oh yeah, let's try this out. And yeah, I've never really done anything like that with an athlete. I've gone up to a minute on a split squat, but yeah, I remember going through that and be like, I think he's writing this wrong. I don't think anyone could hold a bar over their head or something for 5 minutes. Like this seems a little crazy. And then yeah, lo and behold, it's a legit training method or strategy, as I've learned over the years.
Yeah, and Guadango was talking about doing 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off for their work capacity work. Working up to 5-6 minutes of total time. And so me and the guy that works out with me in the morning, shout out Tristan Upton. We've been doing this week, 40 seconds on, 20 seconds off for 5 rounds on just some different movements. And I've been pretty wrecked, not going to lie, and it's light. Like it's not heavy. It's not heavy. Like we did, what did we do? Like I did 20-pound dumbbells on dumbbell bench. Brutal. But yeah, Guadango's, you talk 20-10, but 40-20, which honestly, I think I like 40-20 better than the 20-10 when it comes to really trying to push the capacity, I feel like.
Yeah, I said 2010. Just that was the starting point. I always kind of thought that 2010 was a good place to start. And then very quickly, moving 25-10, 30-10. And I tried 40-10 once and it was way too much, not enough rest. So 40-20 does sound pretty good.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. So kind of switching subjects here, but still on Al Vermeil, Ross. I can't remember where I saw you write it out, but Al talked about at the end of a workout, jumping or doing some sort of plyometric to feel lighter again or feel springy again. Can you just kind of recap that one for us?
Yeah, it was just the quick point of at the end of any workout, doing something to get back into rhythm, back into coordination, back into good impulse, whether it's a plyo, it could be a run, it could be marches, it could be whatever, which I've now heard from him, Coach Gillespie, a bunch of the other guys in that speed, nervous system world that, mentioning doing something at the end to kind of reset everything and get you dialed back and leaving fresh. And that was something that I haven't done, but it's at least as a coach, but it's something you can easily enter in 2 seconds, and whether or not it does a big thing or not, who knows? But if it does, it takes 2 seconds and it's a good use of your time.
Yep. Yeah, I just thought that was interesting. And correct me if I'm wrong, Coach Bill would always have jumps at the end, right? Whether it was jumping split squats or something else, right?
Yeah, jumping split squats.
Yeah. And I never got to ask him, but when I was, a very amateur, not great weightlifter, going through a bunch of the Russian manuals, there was always like depth jumps near the end of the workout. And I remember seeing an interview with Dmitry Klokov where he mentioned that at the end of his workouts or end of his training sessions, he would always do like jump squats or something. And it was just to feel lighter or, get the spring back in the step. Again, it's crazy of all these different people or coaches all end up kind of going back to the same thing. But, I've never done it. So maybe it's something that's missing in my training. Take the heavy leg feeling and kind of lighten them up a little bit, restore that impulse, as Coach Vermeil said this weekend.
Do you guys think that some sort of med ball work would be, along the same lines too? I know if we're looking at lower body, like jumps and stuff, but maybe upper body, some med ball work would be.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that being good. Whether it's real or not, I like throwing med balls. It just restores like aggression and has that kind of like testosterone driven type of thing, where it's just slamming, throwing as hard as you possibly can, whatever sort of implement it is. So I'm a big fan of that.
Cool.
Yeah, and so after Vermeil,
cool. All right.
Zach Deschamps spoke from TCU, and of course, I didn't realize he'd been at TCU for 15 years now, but now he's an assistant AD, so he's overseeing the S&C department and all these other coaches. So we kind of got into a little bit half and half, essentially life as a director, essentially, and then different things to kind of help with overseeing your program. And so we started off his talk just mentioning that typically with strength and conditioning, it's always at least with strength coaches, it's like an us versus them. So an us versus the coaches mentality typically, where, we're against what the coaches are doing, or, we feel kind of jaded that, hey, we're coming in on a Saturday morning last minute because the coach asked us to for this random thing. Because I guess something like that happened at TCU, and that was something the sport coach was just like, man, why is it all strength and conditioning coaches are the same, this and that, the other. So then from there, he's getting to the point of building trust with your coaches, spending time with them, explaining why you do what you do, and building that trust. And I know from Liberty, or time at Liberty, I always felt that working out with the coaches is the number one way to build trust, because they're in there working out, and that's typically when you're kind of just talking about different stuff. And most importantly, when they're working out, you can help them do whatever they're doing, and then you start explaining why, and then all of a sudden they start feeling good and they start doing better, and that's then where that trust is built. So I've always felt that's the way to go when it comes to that. But, whether it's lifting with them, whether it's getting into meetings, going to get food, whatever, just build that trust and build that communication, because then you do get to understand each other. And then from there, your big thing is he was highlighting the fact of coach the coaches. So, and Chris, we kind of did this toward the end here where we were doing the symposiums for the coaches. You're giving them education pieces, you're explaining the whys of your program, things like that. So then the coaches understand your whys, and they're learning the better habits and the better things to do. Like that's something that I'm going to take away, and I'm going to do a better job of giving educational materials out to our coaches, and at the very least offer different times, and whether it's once a month, once, twice a semester, once a season, I don't really know, but offer basically a symposium like we did at Liberty, and whether or not the coaches come, who knows? And if it's only one coach that comes, that's great. That's fine with me. And I am happy to sit there and pour into that program, because as long as a coach shows effort to me that they want to improve and that they want their program to be better, I'll do anything you want. It's coaches that are never around and don't ask questions and then show up last minute that I don't necessarily want to help so much. But if I've got a good relationship with you and you're showing that you're wanting to learn, then we'll be good. Which I did. Again, I did like that a lot. And then his next point, and Chris, you kind of get into this with hockey, and I attempt to get into it with some other sports, of getting involved at all levels of the program. So that starts, we have our physical prep, but trying to get involved with tactical prep, not necessarily tactical, with technical prep, and potentially tactical if you are really that knowledgeable in a sport. But more so, Zach, in his baseball example, was, he now does the throwing programs for their kids. And he started doing that by taking the developmental kids that weren't playing and writing their throwing programs, because the coach let him do that. And then, he got a semester, and long story short, he did a great job. And then now he does all the throwing programs and biomechanics and that type of stuff. So now I've raised my value. I've built my trust. I'm just more valuable to the program and what I'm doing. And then last, his big thing was just communicate, over communicate. And he does once a week emails to the coaching staff, just talking about everything going on in the program, or just like a highlight of, hey, this kid's doing a good job. These two kids weren't. This is going on. This has happened in the weight room, but I'm handling it. And he was making the point of, the head coaches are the CEOs of the program, and they've got to they need all the information they can get to then make decisions on who's on the team, who's off the team, especially when it comes down to scholarship money and that type of stuff. Because if a kid's not doing all the extra stuff they're supposed to do and doing it in the way that you want, then just don't let them be on the team. So those were those big things for me. I don't know if you guys got some extra thoughts there.
I mean, first thought is, dang, that sounds like a phenomenal presentation to be at and be a part of. And again, just to highlight CVASPS, where they bring in different speakers with different topics, and they get to speak to what they're passionate about or whatever in the moment. But here's a talk that isn't weight room specific, isn't X's and O's specific, but just from your little recap there, it was just like, oh man, I took away a bunch of notes here, like the once a week emails to the coaches, view the coaches as the CEO, give information to the coaches so that they can make better decisions. Yeah, that's huge. I really like that. But I know before we recorded, Ross, you felt like you talk a lot, but just kind of want to flip it to you. Being in that role, like Zach is, with that kind of assistant AD role, what were some of the big things that you're either doing well or that you think you might want to modify going into this year?
I don't think I communicate with the coaches I see a lot all the time. So like I communicate with the football coach, I communicate with the baseball coach, because they work at the school. To caveat that, I also work with a bunch of their kids, where I don't, I've only got a couple soccer kids. I've only got a couple tennis kids. Like I have a ton of football, a ton of basketball, a ton of track, and a ton of baseball, and I also have volleyball. So with the volleyball coach, I'm talking to him, and he runs such a good program that I don't necessarily need to talk to him a lot, and I don't know if he would want that communication, but I think that could just be a part where do a little better job of being on board with what's going on. I think our track coach would be all for it because they've both ran at a high level and they kind of have that expectation. But I think that's something I could pick up on. I think now that I've been helping us out with our middle school, that communication piece is just going to need to be better. And then, like I said, man, I think the coaching the coaches is really the next level. Now that I'm a year in at this high school, that's really the next step we need to take, because I'm doing all I can only control, whoever's in my class and the kids that I see. But at the end of the day, the coaches are going to make the biggest impact on performance and the biggest return on investment. And they need to know best practices. This is why we do this. Like if I have to see another team sit in a circle and do static stretches and then go play a game, I'm going to lose it. And so like it's things like that of, I've pivoted the football team, they no longer do 20 hamstring stretches and just mess around for 10 minutes before practice. They now do a warm up. And funny story for that is I went and watched them play 7-on-7 the other day. And I hope they listen to this. Went and watched them play 7-on-7 the other day. And I'm just watching. I'm not doing their warm up. It's not I don't need to. We literally do it every day. There's like a core 6 to 7, 8 things that we do every day. And then from there, I vary it. So these kids get up to warm up and they do one thing that we do in our warm up. And everything else was a hamstring stretch or like stuff that I haven't seen all year. They did our goat stretch and they did hip rockers, and they did it for like 10 yards up and back for like 2 minutes. There wasn't a single pogo jump. There wasn't a single prime time. There wasn't a single sprint. There wasn't any of this stuff that we literally do every day. They got done with their warm up. And I was like, guys, that was awful. What was that? We do this every day. And they're like, well, I don't remember it. I'm like, no, you remember it. Anyway, we had that talk. I had that talk with them. Had that talk with them the next day. So that was fun. But yes, coaching the coaches is probably the biggest one for me.
With the athlete warm up, they definitely know and remember. I have athletes where if we're gonna hold or do something for 15 seconds, and I'm not paying attention, I'm talking to somebody, and it goes to like 16, they switch. Like they just have it like dialed in their brain of like, that was 15 seconds. Let me go over now. Yeah, it's pretty wild. But yeah, to that point, the best thing that I ever did at Liberty was host the Liberty Hockey Summit, where I just took everything that I've learned about hockey from guys in the NHL or guys at major D1 schools and just kind of presented it to our coaches of, here's what I do, here's why, here's what I suggest that you guys do and why. And once I did that, that's when we kind of entered the 21st century, so to speak, and we stopped training on ice with not as great or as beneficial of strategies as we do now, right? Coaches started to understand, we should be really fast and we should be fresh. We shouldn't be really slow and really tired. And that was big. And I definitely need to do something like that again. Educate the coaches. I think that's a big one.
I think one of my favorite years coaching at Liberty was when I was coaching hockey and our team in the weight room too.
Yeah.
But I will say one of the things I ran into was the classic Mondays off workouts. And try as hard as I may, coaches, we'd play a game Friday and Saturday, and then, guys were tired. someone on the team might say, "Hey, can we take workout off on Monday?" Well, why are we taking Monday off? Let's get back in the weight room on Monday, and then we can ease up later in the week and go into the next weekend fresh. But that was one of those battles that, that's when you try and fight back a little bit more and educate. And that's where I think the communication is everything, and educating the coaches as much as you can.
Yeah. For sure. And that's a lot of like culture thing with the athletes and the captains too. If you get a good captain on your team, oh man, it's such a benefit. Right. But sorry, go ahead, Ross.
No, you're good. Well, I tell you what, let's talk about Guadango. So like I told you, Chris, before we got talking, you and him are the same person, and you need to meet. And so just figure out a way to do that, because you guys are the same person. So he got into his talk, just kind of talking about stuff he'd learned. He also talked about starting with work capacity and then building strength, pretty straightforward stuff. The heart and soul of his training at the end of the day is just going to be mitigating risk. He's also dealing with professional athletes. So it's getting them to feel good. What's the least amount of risk I can do and train to make them feel better? Because he was talking about, that's why he got into acupuncture and why he's learning that, because then he can be kind of a one-stop shop for his athletes instead of having to go all these other places. He is just the guy that takes care of them and gets them feeling good, because if you can get a pro athlete feeling good, then they're going to work with you for a really long time. And that's really all that matters. And so getting that, and then I shared that podcast with y'all, but he got to talking about just getting your sleep, getting your 7 to 9 hours. Cause I guess he went through a rough patch where he got a ton of anxiety. He wasn't sleeping very well. Like, I think it was something stupid, like was up for 36 hours straight, like something wild of couldn't go to sleep. So like there was just stuff going on. And now that's kind of what he focuses on. But he referenced that podcast I sent you guys from Joe Rogan, and I think it was with Matt Williams. Is that the guy's name?
Matthew Walker?
Yes.
Sounds right.
Yes, Matthew Walker. And about every minute of that episode, I'm out here like saying out loud, wow. Just the stats with the sleep, and because the really interesting highlight in that podcast, if you've gotten to it or not, is with daylight savings time. They have data of when we spring ahead and we lose an hour, like heart attack risks goes up, or heart attack goes up by like 21%.
Crazy.
And then in the fall, when we fall back, it goes down 21%, because we gain an hour and lose an hour. And that little bit of fluctuation impacts heart attacks. But he goes into all these stats, which is wild. But yeah, he got into a lot of different stuff, was really all over the place. And it was good. But I think a really huge takeaway from his acupuncture doctor that I liked, and Chris, you can kind of ask questions from there, is his acupuncture doctor, and just how that works is emphasizing the learning piece before you start really teaching other people what you do. And I think it's super valuable kind of for our field. And it was making the point of you learn for the first 10 years, you spend the next 10 years figuring out your own system. Then you spend the next 10 years perfecting your own system. And then you spend the next 10 years teaching. So after basically 30 years of learning, that's when you can really start teaching people, and you figured out your own stuff. And obviously we're learning, we've been around. I feel like I'm at the point of where I'm starting to figure out my own system for sure. And getting in there, but also you're perfecting it, but more so figuring it out, and then get to the point of perfecting it. But I think people can be very quickly to just, hey, I learned this, and then you just start teaching, and then you didn't actually try it and actually learn it and see what works, see what doesn't. It's kind of like Chris, we were talking before we got on here of debating on whether or not I want to do this, a typical linear low, medium, high weeks, or do I want to vary the load or undulate the load within the week on specific movements? If it's a heavy deadlift week, then it's going to be a light squat week, and vice versa. Or do I want the whole week to be low, medium, heavy? Now I know that low, medium, heavy gets results. I've done it. I've seen it. I know that on the medium week, that's when I'm going to see PRs, and that's going to be our best week performance wise. But if I go the other way, I feel like I'm going to have a higher quality training, and it's not going to be as stressful. So like, it's things like that where you're kind of perfecting your system and figuring out what works, what doesn't. But yeah, from him, it was good, but I think you need to meet him.
Yeah. Hey, next time I'm up in New Jersey, I'll bring him some Taylor ham and mozzarella, and we'll just kick back like old friends. I do really well with the Italians. I grew up with a lot of them, so I know what it takes. And he's got a beard, I got a beard. It'll be perfect.
Perfect. Ross, what else you got? Who else was there? Anybody else?
Old Jonas. Jonas from what's his company called? I forgot. Speedworks.
Speedworks. Yeah,
Speedworks. So he spoke. Chris, you would have really liked his super detailed on the running. That would have if that would have been in 2019, I would have had no notes because it just would have been over my head, and I wouldn't have known what he was saying or what he was looking at. But nevertheless, so his the big thing from him, he was talking about just accelerating in the first bit, and he opened up with highlighting the fact of look at what good coaches agree on. Whatever the top coaches are, what are all the things that they basically all agree on? All right, well, you need to learn those things. Those are the things you need to focus on. And everybody's going to have their little nuances of what they agree or disagree. But, 90% of the time they're agreeing on the same stuff. It's that last 10% that they change. So figure out what those things are, learn, and use those things. So then he got into profiling ways people accelerate. And it was basically their stride length and then how long they're in the air, or stride frequency and how long they're in the air. And both have different strategies. If you're shorter air time, you're more strength-based. If you're higher air time, you're more elastic, because I'm going to spend more time in the air to then put my foot in the ground. If I am low air time, I'm trying to get my foot back on the ground because I'm strength-based, and I'm trying to spend more time on the ground because I need more time to apply force. But he had all these videos, and it broke it down, and now I can't unsee it from seeing our kids run. Like beforehand, I never would have really categorized it or noticed it per se. But after watching that, it was just interesting. And ideally, you kind of want to be in the middle, right? I don't want to be too low. I don't want to be too high. I want to be kind of in the middle. And he was making the point of if you do really try to change somebody's technique like that, then you're trying to change their natural strategy, and that's going to increase your risk, or not risk. Yeah. Increase risk of injury for that athlete. If you do decide to try to change that natural gait that they do for acceleration. Acceleration broke down basically into three things of how well you project, how well you switch your legs, and then reacting to the ground. And their whole system breaks that down, and they do analysis and work on that. But it was good. It was really good, and it was good to hear him at the end. He was talking about that he's both a quote unquote like muscle and movement guy. Like it's not all just movement. Like you do need to go strengthen these things. Like I want to go in the weight room and lift and do ISOs and work on this to help this out. But then I also want you to move well and getting that balance, where I feel like most track guys, quote unquote track guys, it's always movement. It's not necessarily the weight room piece involved.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And to go back to the kind of first thing you were mentioning with Jonas of look at what the good coaches agree on. That's something, now that I've dived down the speed world quite a bit, that's something that I need to do is figure out what some other coaches are doing. And case in point, I had a conversation today with another coach, and we were looking at a picture of a sprinter, and we just like couldn't agree on something. And it was kind of about hip position. And I was like, no, you want neutral hips all the time. You do not want anterior pelvic tilt. And then the coach I was talking to was like, oh, well, this guy says this and this. And that's when I realized like, oh, we're on like two different pages here. We're talking about two different kind of like technique or technical things. So yeah, I feel like for me, that's kind of the next thing. Like all the guys at Altus, Stu McMillan, Dan Paff, I haven't really dived into any of that. And that's a big time education platform here for sprinting. So yeah, that was a kind of a good reminder. And I thought it was interesting where he's profiling acceleration types, because I could start to see it in my mind, because I've sat on my 1080 and watched so many people accelerate for 10 meters. There's athletes that have what I would call like a low heel recovery, or just they keep their feet lower to the ground. And then there's athletes that kind of project themselves out, get their foot high, and kind of strike the ground. So yeah, I'll have to be on the lookout for that, and then look at some of their trap bar numbers and their vertical jump numbers, and kind of see a difference. Because I have one of my fastest hockey players is one of our worst jumpers, right? So is he just all strength based and just pop, pop, pop? And so yeah, it'll be interesting. I'll have to start to look at that.
Chris, have you created profiles for? Sorry, Ross.
You're good, Blair. Go ahead.
Have you started creating profiles for the hockey players based on those things at all? Based off the 1080?
So I've got a bunch of data, and I have my whiteboard like a beautiful mind written out. Right now, I have one of my workers going through and filling out like a last bit of data for me. So yes, and I'm waiting on a few more pieces to come together to kind of see if all this work was worth it as far as a profiling type of thing goes. What I'm really trying to do is correlate 30 meter on and off ice force velocity profiles with the 1080 with a 10 meter sprint. And just the more data I get with these force velocity profiles on and off the ice, and the more data I get for 10 meters, I feel like it's just kind of going to be there. But the thing we're plugging in right now is distance that you're going to cover in 1 second. So then I can learn whether this person is a good starter. A good starter is going to have more isometric strength, and yes and no, but the long and short of that question.
Cool.
Yeah,
good stuff.
So then the last speaker of the day was Allie Kirshner, and so she works with Art of Coaching with Brett Bartholomew, and so
really cool.
So she got out of strength and conditioning. She was at Stanford with women's basketball. What I didn't realize is that her last year of coaching, that was when Stanford won the national championship for women's basketball. So then she got out of strength and conditioning the year after your team wins a national championship, which is an interesting time to choose to get out of strength and conditioning. But hers was really good, especially if you've been coaching, because her thing was, why do coaches leave strength and conditioning? I think we can kind of all have an opinion here for sure of why do different guys and girls get out of it. And she opened up with, how many of you guys know coaches that have left the field, which basically everybody in the room. And then how many coaches do you know that are that retire as S&C coaches? Not many. Not many.
Yeah.
And so there's clearly some sort of gap going on of whether it's the expectations of the job, the pay, support, all that kind of stuff. She broke down, a bunch of these reasons of why coaches leave. And it kind of led with burnout. Like, burnout is very real. And I think that's hard for, she said this too, and I know I'm guilty of it for sure. At times where burnout, you can almost feel guilty of being burnt out, because, as a coach, and especially a strength coach, it's just supposed to be go, 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 go all the time, like thinking that you don't need a break and you don't need that mental break. You're just going, like, you're the guy or the girl that can just tough it out and you're going to be fine. And, burnout doesn't mean that you're leaving, and leaving doesn't mean that you're burnt out. It's just that, hey, you just need some sort of break. And a lot of times the way that it's set up, especially with the strength coaches, like, let's just say a schedule of a strength coach, you're there earliest and you're leaving last typically. And you are going in on days, or you're doing things at odd hours of the day that the sport coach, speaking to college, that the sport coach isn't necessarily doing. So that can lead to a little bit of irritation and strain the relationship sometimes between your strength coach and your sport coach, because one's there for a lot of hours and isn't necessarily compensated for it that well. The other one is significantly compensated for it and is not there nearly the hours all year. And there's certainly seasons, right? There's seasons to every job, and strength and conditioning doesn't necessarily have seasons. I mean, you have your sports season, but like, you're still full bore in when the sport is in season, but then you're in the off season and then you're full bore there. Like, there's never this break of a time to kind of recharge. But nevertheless, she broke down all these different reasons. And with all of these reasons, like, it's basically lack of promotion, lack of pay, lack of understanding or being appreciated, not feeling like you have a good community. So, like, for example, Chris, like, you're over at the ice rink by yourself all day. Jared or whoever is over at Toys R Us by themselves all day. Like, you're not interacting with each other. And so that's not helpful. Like, it's you don't have somebody else that does what you do. All the inner competition piece that you see, like, guys and girls, kind of, it's just a toxic thing. Not having the right role or being in the right fit, lack of autonomy. You can't necessarily quantify your value, and then other stuff like that. So, long story short, of all those things, whatever you feel is the biggest mismatch in your job, that's what you need to work on. And that'll kind of help you get over burnout, not want to leave a job, work on those things. And some of those things you can't fix, some of them you can, and let's kind of go from there. Her biggest practical thing that she mentioned that I really like was stacking your days. So in other words, if you've got basically making a high-low model for your days. So let's say like Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday are like big work days for you. Monday I'm going to spend, Monday's like answer a bunch of my emails, do programming, whatever it is. But Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday are, heavy work days, heavy training days. But then Wednesday, I don't have lifting. There's no this, like that's my low day. So that's the day I can really kind of recharge. And so stacking tasks on different days versus just kind of doing it all at once at one time can help give you a little mental break during the week. So you can kind of recharge. It's like, hey, on Wednesday, I'm going to do this. I'll spend a little extra time at breakfast or reading or whatever. And then I got to go to practice. I do the practice and then I go home. So I thought that was a super, super helpful thing.
Did you take away or combine any things with Zach's presentation and Allie's presentation where you were like, oh, okay, yeah, I see these two kind of blending and working together?
Not until you're saying something. I haven't. I think
yeah.
I think for, Zach's situation, when you're getting your way up to a director role, you're naturally, or an assistant AD role, there is a little progression. There is going to be some pay in there, and there's going to be kind of defining your role. But I think that for like a guy like Zach, when you're in a role like that, I would argue that he is the one that's really controlling the why coaches leave per se, like all of those little things. He is going to dictate a lot of that, of talking value, where you fit, all that type of stuff, more so than anybody else, because you're the one that's reporting to the AD or the associate AD or whoever to then fight for your people and do those type of things. So you're really more in charge of that, I would argue, at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, going back to the burnout, so I've been at Liberty, on July 1st, I finished 8 years, right? So I'm on year 9, and there was only 1 year, 1 semester where I used that word, like burnout. I love Liberty, and it's a great place to work, but it was during COVID. So the first semester of fall 2020, I just felt like it was so unfair every single day, where I went from, running 4 workouts a week with men's and women's hockey to 8 workouts a week, on paper. But on top of that, it was probably like 12 to 15 workouts a week working with people's schedules. And I just felt like I was the only person in the entire department who was having to go through all these, hoops and do all this extra work with all the cleaning and wearing masks and everything like that. And so that was really rough. And that was kind of a taste for me of, there's probably a lot of other coaches out there that this is their everyday, where, the sport coaches, they just showed up, ran their practice and left. I had to, sanitize before, after, and run additional workouts because we had to have smaller groups. And I would not want that. If that was my life, I could not imagine having that many workouts, just staying an hour and a half later because I had to wipe down every single weight there, and just feeling like nobody else was putting in the effort or the work that I was. That was tough. That was a very tough time. Yeah, not fun. But no, that's good. One practical thing that we could send home to the viewers here, Ross, that you think you may have taken away, and then Blair, I'll go to you with your kind of practical thing that you took away, and I'll finish it off here, and then we could kind of wrap this up.
In terms of the conference, Chris, or
yes, yeah. Conference, or maybe even something we've talked about here.
I think for me, the biggest practical thing is just educate everyone around you of why you do what you do, like every single person.
Yeah, that's a a good one for sure. And yeah, it just creates buy-in, helps everyone get on the same page, get your support. I like it. All right, Blair, what about you? Something we've talked about today, or exchanging texts with Ross while he was at the conference, or recapping and stuff like that. One practical thing for CVASPS 2022 here.
I think building off what Ross said, and like we're all kind of the lifelong learner types.
Definitely
in educating everyone else, you're forced to spend the time educating yourself. And as you know, like the more you learn, the less you feel you know, right?
Yeah.
Think about the first time you opened up super training, right?
Yeah.
It's like at that point before you open it, you're like, oh, I got a pretty good handle on things, and then you open it, and you're like, I know nothing. I literally know nothing. So just adding to Ross's thing, but one thing that stuck out was just like, look at what good coaches agree on. And I mean, how many the snake oil salesmen are there out there on social media who literally have coached for a minute and, they have 95,000 followers. So it's like, well, hold on a second. We can figure out who the good coaches are. It's not always the person with the most followers, but it's the people who've been around, right? And Alvar Meal has seen more athletes than we've seen people in a Walmart. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So like, and they don't have they didn't have what we have now, right? It was with these two things and using their other senses to like actually learn how to coach. So we can look at past coaches, present coaches who are really solid, and like, they are probably going to agree on a lot of things if they're really good. And we just take that and absorb it. And that's going to take us a long way. So I think that was one of my favorite things. I wrote it down in big capital letters. So
nice. Yeah, that's a good one. So for me, it was, I totally agree on the education side, making sure that I'm keeping all the coaches informed and seeking out that time for them. And I agree with you as well, Blair, of just seeing what the other best people are doing, so to speak. And my kind of blend for that is I really tend to get carried away with things, right? Like Ross, you're always my anchor to kind of pull me down before I float away into just not the right place, so to speak. And looking at the old school guys, or the old timers, or the OGs, whatever we want to call it, the guys who've been doing it the longest, it kind of seems like they have their stuff and it always works. And so for me, it's I need to view everything through just a more simpler lens of they got to be strong, they have to have work capacity, and make sure I always have that in mind first before I kind of get carried away with some of the fancier stuff that I tend to get distracted by or just really enjoy. And I've heard from a bunch of coaches, you have to have work capacity, you have to have that aerobic component. And we know that you have to be strong, maybe not into the extent that, we used to think about all these years ago of constantly pushing up your squat and deadlift and bench, but you have to have a foundational level of strength. It's one of the lowest hanging fruits, and you have to have capacity to kind of build and put all this together. With that being said, any other kind of thoughts or things to add here, fellas?
Nope.
Cool. All right. Well, that was our recap of Ross heading up to Richmond, Virginia for CVASPS 2022. And I made a note here at the beginning of what I really liked from my time of going there in 2019 was the speakers had time to speak, right? They weren't limited to 45 minutes or an hour. If they had a good topic and they were passionate about it, they could just roll. And I really liked that, where, there's sometimes the movie ends and you want it to keep going. Well, at CVASPS, they allow the movie to keep going as long as the audience wants. But fellas, another good one here. A lot of good stuff to kind of take away. And as our school years start to approach and the summer is kind of ending, I think we're all going to have some really awesome kind of practical takeaways to head into the year with. And so hopefully next podcast here, we'll be able to recap my time up in Minnesota with the Revolutions of Speed Training Clinic. And we'll continue just to talk about, what some of the big dogs out there in the world are coming up with these days. All right, fellas, as always, another good one.